The next thing I started to work on after I brought the other models to Heritage Park was the north end. I figured I might as well finish all that off where the golf course was and the tunnel and the sky ride. And I figured the models wouldn't be too difficult that I would have to do. So I began with this. This is the mechanism that was the tensioner at the loading station of the sky ride. The motor was actually down at the far end of the sky ride near where the zoo was. And this was simply a tensioner wheel that ran the cable and the cars hung off of it. So this was pretty easy to design and it printed out pretty well. Had to do a lot of supports on this, but it looks pretty good and it stands up on its own. However, the cabs are proving to be a real challenge. They're just so small, again, just like the jets, that I can't get any of the detail to hold because this was one of the seats. So it was just basically like a swing seat, and it had two posts coming off of either end, and that held the canopy on top. This was the canopy, and the canopy had a hook on it that hooked onto the cable. So in theory, this would be hooked onto the wire like this. Now this one is too big, and I tried to make it bigger to see if it would stay together, because this one obviously did not stay together. The seat came out really nice, but I couldn't get the top to stay on. But that's really the scale that the seat should be if it's on the sky ride. Stay up, please. There we go. So I abandoned that and until I can figure out how I'm going to solve that problem. And instead, I started work on the train tunnel entrance, the big tunnel down by what used to be the ballroom. And there was a big ramp that went up, and it went across and then down by the bathrooms. And it had in it a sign, and the sign was embossed in concrete, and it was above a waterfall trough, and the water would run out of that, run down the side of the stonework, and then into a little holding pond that was all made out of stone. So it was pretty nice. Well, I'm still working on the tunnel entrance itself, but I did find something really interesting. I found that Cura, the software I'm using to slice the models, Cura actually can slice JPEGs and turn them into bas-relief, embossed, raised things. So I put the picture I have of that Mountain Park golf course sign into Cura and ended up with this pretty remarkable likeness of it, all embossed with the stone. So all I have to do is paint that, and that's done. Then I have to put the rest of the tunnel area together. But I did finish the tunnel that was in the middle of the golf course. There were two ramps, and you'd cross over to the other side. This right here are two little ponds, right there and right there, for waterfalls. And the train would go right through here and then around to the entrance. But I think this is a little too small. I'm going to have to bring this to Heritage Park and size it because I didn't take a measurement of that. But I think it's a little too small. So that's where we're at so far. I'll update you when things get a little more progress. Well, what I'm building now is the dodgem cars. It was actually a fairly easy process. Took a little tweaking, but an easy process in Blender to build it. I'm going to try one out now and see how it comes out. What you're looking at is not a scrap piece of plastic from the printer. That is the dodgem car at a ridiculously tiny scale. It's actually the correct scale. That's the size it would be in the model, but it is so small as to be pretty much irrelevant. I'm going to try printing this just a little bit bigger to see if I can get any more detail in this, but right now that's not really what I'm looking for. So I made the dodgem car a little bit bigger. Just joking. I wanted to see what it would look like if I printed it about 50 millimeters wide. And the detail is pretty nice. Again, hard to see when it's all white like that, but it's got the little side fins on here and the ridge in the middle and the steering wheel's on there. And the pole was on here. It came up until I accidentally dropped it when I was trying to clean some of this up, and it broke it off. But that's a pretty accurate look at the dodgem cars circa 1960s at Mountain Park. Dodgems from Lawrence, Massachusetts. That's where they were made. But this is the one I did a little bit bigger, and this one actually came out pretty good. It has enough detail in it. It would be, in scale, about 12 feet long, so it's much larger than the actual dodgem, but I think I'll be able to fit about half a dozen of these in the dodgem car building, and that should look just fine. I'll get them painted up and put them in there. So here we are back at Heritage Park, and the loading station for the Skyride fits perfectly. So I know that's going to work. All I got to do is paint that up. And a couple surprises. Over here, this is the large version of the mid-course tunnel on the train. And as you can see, it's really small compared to the size that I need. So the length is correct. I just don't have the correct width. So I'm pretty much going to have to double this width on the model in order to get it to span correctly across the tracks. And over here, this one is also too narrow. The train tunnel needs to be at least double that width. But then I'm going to have an interesting problem with this, where if it does move over this way, the ramp is going to go right into there. So I think what I might do is build it out a bit, because this is where the ramp should be. And so I'll need a little bit more space behind here in order to make that work. So I can add a little bit to that and build it out so that this is really where that ramp should end up, right there. So a little bit more work to do on these. And as far as the dodgem car goes, here it is, and it's actually really tiny compared to the dodgem car building, so my larger model of the dodgem is actually going to work fine. So I can make it a little bigger, and it should look okay in there. Even though in scale it would be huge, in the model it should look fine. So that's where we are right now. So I printed out the dodgem cars, and I just finished painting them, and I used the colors that were used in the final years of the park. They had yellow, red, blue, and green in the pastel colors, and mostly they just used the blue and green. So I printed out 6 of them, and I'll put those around inside the building, glue them down there with my tweezers. I had to paint these with toothpicks because they're so small, but they have pretty nice detail in there. I still have to do the black accents around the edge and the bumper. And I also, while I was at it, I painted the bigger one, and we'll look at that once it's all dried here, and I'll put the accents on that one, and then that'll be done. Well, I decided to do 6 more dodgem cars, the yellow and the red ones, and I'm going to put those on the sides of the dodgem car in storage, just like they were at the park. So these will be running around on the dodgem car arena, and these will be in storage. But it'll have a little more. I mean, it didn't take too long to print them, so I figured why not. And meanwhile, while I was doing all that, I also did one more ride that I didn't expect to. Look at that. It's the Bubble Bounce. This is the ride that used to spin, and it would go psh, and the air piston underneath would just lift the whole thing up as it would spin. And that came out pretty nice. It was a very simple one to do because it was basically just a bunch of cylinders and a cone and a sphere. So that made it very easy to put together. And I also did the ticket booth, which was a unique ticket booth that was used on the ride with the ramps. And that one right there. So that I'll paint. And I also redid the north tunnel. So that's pretty much done. And it should fit. What I'm going to have to do with this is I'm going to have to put an extension on the back to get it far enough away from the men's restroom that was there. And this right here, I actually embedded the text, the Mountain Park Golf, into the sign right up here, but that didn't come out. It was too small, so I'm just going to have to paint that in when I do the painting of that. And this over here is the Skyride return. And what I did is I put bamboo skewers into the bottom so that when I mount it on the Homosote, I'll just put 2 holes in the Homosote like I did for the roller coaster, and then I'll just press that in place and glue it down so that won't go anywhere. And so the Skyride will be done. So we're almost done with the north end of the park. I just have to fix the roofs of the restrooms, and I also have to build the train, and that's turning out to be a big challenge. So we're continuing along. Here they all are, painted. I used acrylic paint for this, and just like with the Ferris wheel, it just doesn't have the saturation that the oil paint does. So I think I'm going to stick with enamel from now on. Although it is colorful, and it's somewhat similar to the way the Bubble Bounce was painted. And I got the little booth painted as well. So that's all set. And I have the mid-tunnel done, with little pools of water there. And this, I just have to get the tiny marker and put Mountain Park Golf on there. But this is pretty much done. And I also finished the extra roofs I needed to correct the restrooms at the golf course. So that's the one for the women's room. This is the one for the men's room. And I also made the extension to go on the back of this, where the train tunnel is, because it wasn't long enough. So that's all set, and you can see the other dodgem cars all painted. And I also spent time making dun 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 a massive dodgem car, just for fun, complete with wheels. I'm not going to paint this. My painting skills, as it turns out, are just not very good. So I'm going to leave it white. But that's pretty close to the way the dodgem cars looked. I'm happy with that. So the only thing remaining before I go to Heritage Park is I have to make the train itself. And I'm not really sure how I'm going to do that yet. But I'm going to dive into it and see what happens. I made the trains. I started off with this one over here, which turned out to be a little too big. So I went the other extreme and I ended up making this one, which turned out to be way too small. And so I settled on the middle one here, which was just right. And it will sit in there like this, because obviously there were more seating cars in the original train. I even though managed to get the little windows in there, but it was a very simplistic model. Not exactly, it sort of looks like the General Electric engine that was on the original train from the Miniature Train Company. So it has that sort of profile. And once I paint it, it'll probably look a bit better. Given my painting skills, maybe not. So anyway, the train is done. All I have to do is paint it, and then all the pieces will be ready to go to Heritage Park. I did notice that this bridge here that's in the middle of the golf course is a little low. If this train were to go through, it would decapitate people. But it's painted, it's done, and the train won't be anywhere near it, so I'll leave it at that. The train is done, it's painted, and I also figured out how to do the sign for the Mountain Park Golf. I simply printed it out on paper and then glued it on there. And that should serve its purpose. Trying to write it, given my unsteady hands while I'm painting, trying to actually print it on there would have been a mess. So that worked out quite well. And now I just got to bring it to Heritage Park. Off we go. The north end is done. Well, sort of. So I've got the train and that and the extension on the back of the tunnel. And I've got the center tunnel in there. The only thing I'm missing is the roofs because they were too small. So I've got to get a ruler and measure these and make sure I have them right, because they fit on the mock-ups that I did, which should be identical to these, but didn't quite work out. So I'm gonna have to redo the roofs, but that's fine. Over here, the Skyride take-up is in, and the dodgem cars are in. They were a little challenged to get in there to try to squeeze them between those posts, but they're in. And then way down the other end of the park, I've got the bubble bounce all set. So it's coming along. I'm not sure how much more I'm going to get done this year because I've got a lot of work to do at school, but I'll at least try to get the roofs, the proper roofs on the restrooms, and that'll finish off the north end completely. And then that's it. I'm done with that portion. And onward, probably the next thing will be over here, the station for the Mountain Flyer and Out of This World over here. Getting there little by little.